What's up? It's Keith Kalfas, working on a Sunday, but I wanted to show you something here about the different buckets. And I had a friend that told me one time, he started a business before I did back in the day. We actually had Amazon businesses. My first business was an Amazon eBay business, and my basement was stocked with products. And I made pretty decent money way before I started a landscaping business. I did that at night, and it failed horribly. But my friend who got me into that, and it's a different video, but he told me that he's like, dude, when you have your own business, if you get below like 10 grand, you start getting really, really worried, or whatever it is for you. It could be 100, it could be a million. I don't know what it is for you, you know, but let's just say that your threshold is like 10,000 bucks. And if you get below that, you start getting worried because you have all your operating expenses. But I think of like, I'm obsessed with this idea of like an ice cube tray. Have you ever put an ice cube tray inside of the sink, and then you let a little stream of water run, and then it fills up the next one and the next, and if you wait, it'll fill up like all 12 ice cubes. And I think of that like that's how reality is. That's how nature is. That's what Parkinson's law is, that no matter how big the space is, something will always fill that space. I think of a circuit board, and if you put electricity through it and you got like capacitors and diodes and things like that, like it'll go wherever you create it. Like if you create little marketing systems in your business, the energy will flow. Those are the structures and the boundaries, just like the ice cube tray. So if you have and you create containers or little systems, because energy is abundant in nature and it flows all over the place. Plants and flowers and trees grow and water flows. But if you create structures, then the energy will flow through it because you created the structure. And just by that primordial nature of physics, it happens somehow, right? And I was thinking about the ice cube. Did you seriously just lick the pen, Kalfas? Yeah, I licked the pen. So I was thinking about this. I read that book, Profit First by Mike Michalowicz, and I have my own little version of that. And having like multiple bank accounts, but before you even do that, I was thinking of like these containers. Let's just say like you put money in this container. Let's just say you peel off like 10% of everything you make, even if you can't afford it, no matter what. And just like Brian Tracy said in his books like The 21 and the Laws of Success and Eat That Frog, he was talking about, well, if you don't have 10%, then you should start out with 1%, and then you should eventually elevate it to 2%, then 3%, until you eventually hit 10%. That's how Brian Tracy used to talk. I remember having I had cassette tapes. Let me know in the comments if you had cassette tapes with AA batteries, and then you had the Walkman, and then you had the Discman. Who had a Discman? Yeah, remember when iPods first came out, bro? I was jamming that. I was paying my friend to download everything by Tony Robbins and Brian Tracy and all that, and learned so much at a young age. But anyways, so I remember before, you know, I had actual bank accounts and was paying taxes and all that stuff, when I was just a little small fry guy with a, you know, out cutting lawns on the side for my job. I had like a bunch of different envelopes hiding under my mattress, and I would write, and there would never be more than a few $1,000 total because I was broke, but I would write on the envelopes, you know, this is my cell phone bill, this is my electricity, this is my rent. And I would put the money in there until it built up, and I knew I always had the money there. But then I started thinking about like having like a buffer. So this is what I mean by like a buffer, like the ice cube trays. What if, and I'll kind of speed this up here, and I'll just really simplify it. This is all money. What if you had created so many ice cube trays and buffers that you're actually living from here? You're paying all your bills and your expenses. Obviously, you want to separate your business from your personal income, but I'm not talking about any of that here. Let's just say, you know, your bills are getting paid and your expenses are getting paid out of this bucket. But just like you know what a capacitor is in car audio? I used to be obsessed with installing car audio systems. You can hook up an extra 12-volt battery or have a 1 farad or a half farad capacitor, so that way when the bass is hitting, when you're listening to like Sir Mix-a-Lot, if the bass is hitting too much, too hard, it will drain and it'll start fluttering because there isn't enough stored up energy inside of the amplifier is little capacitors to make that work. So you'd get like a 1 farad capacitor that's constantly buffering the juice, so when the bass hits, it's never completely generating and depleting the system, right? So I think about that. Brian Tracy also talks about the wedge. Here's time over money. You know, here's time, over money. And he talks about putting a wedge between your income and your expenses by not elevating your lifestyle and working your butt off constantly and, you know, saving money. This little wedge gets farther and farther and farther apart as you go, as the years go by, that you have cash reserves that you can invest in things that create, you know, passive income, just so you have a safety. You have a buffer. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, then it can seem impossible to create that wedge or create that buffer, because you're like, I'm working my tail off 50 hours a week. I'm barely making enough money to even make the bills. Like those type of thoughts I used to have. And then I learned that, oh my God, there's no ship coming to save me. I have to go work 90 hours a week. So, if you have to go work 90 hours a week or do whatever you can to figure out how to make more money or start a side hustle to at least get that buffer. You know, I'm not sitting here trying to give you financial advice. I'm just saying this is really, really interesting. You somehow have to build at least one of these farad capacitors. You know, there are people who have tons of these going on, but it's taken them years to figure it out. But some type of buffer to buffer out your expenses versus your money coming in. And once you get one or a couple of these things going, then whenever, you know, because it's all about smoothing out these waves, right? When times are really, really good, if you're going to like Best Buy and buying a big screen TV and you're going out to eat all the time, going out to the movies, and then all of a sudden times get bad, now you're suffering and you're broke. T. Harv Eker talks about this in the book The Millionaire Mindset. It's an amazing book. Audible.com, I'll put a link in the description below. You can get like a 30-day free trial of Audible.com audiobooks. I'll put a link below. But he said, like, they were rich and then they were broke, and then they were rich and they were broke. The Entrepreneur Roller Coaster, book by Darren Hardy. He talks about this, and he says, how can you smooth these things out so they're like this? And then you have more stability in your life. You get more stability in your life by having more structure, by marrying together love and emotion and being artistic, and it's a beautiful day, and I love, you know, playing the guitar and the piano and singing and painting art and all that stuff, and versus like cold hard brutal commercialism and working to pay bills and money and all that stuff. Like, it's weird, like if you bask in the sun in the hammock playing the guitar in the sun all day, then when the storm comes you die. But if you work constantly and all you care about is the structure, then the guy who likes to bask in the hammock and play the guitar, you know, he dies anyways. And then you just become this dude with bags under your eyes who hates his life, feeling like you're your own slave and you have to do this. And I really, really think that creating that buffer, you know, like by working when others are sleeping, working when others are playing, and hustling for a season, you do it in, you know, that way when the lull comes, you can smooth this thing out like that. Especially like in the winter, if you're in a seasonal business, then your life isn't so volatile. But the hard part is, it can take 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years to get, and I don't know how long it takes for you. This took me a good 5 years to kind of get these buffers in place. And I was a total victim about it. I hated my life. All I did was work. I felt paying penance. And I always look back, it's like, well, you should have thought about that when you were 14. What were you doing playing Mortal Kombat when you were 14 years old, huh? 14 years old, hanging out with your friends, riding bikes and smoking weed. What were you doing, man? Huh? You should have been working. You should have been starting your side hustle. You should have been out there 50 hours a week. 13 years old. You know, but we live, we grow, we learn, and then it feels like it's here. And the pressure keeps going up, and the stakes keep getting higher and higher and higher and higher, you know? So I think leaning into it is the best thing, instead of running from it and sticking your head in the sand, which will only make it worse and worse and worse. At some point, you finally accept, like, there's, I think, like 7 stages of grief. I'm not going to go through them right now, but you get to a point where you're not in denial. You're not having like some type of breakdown, you know, because at first you're in disbelief, then you're in denial, then you're in full-blown like rage, no way, this can't be true. And then when you finally accept that's the way reality is, then you're at deep peace with it, and then you can just get on getting on. Because the thing I know is that no ship's coming to save you. My uncle told me that when I was a little kid, and it just made sense. Like, you can keep swimming in the water your whole life and drowning to death and complaining and crying, but there is no lucky lottery that's gonna save you. No ship's coming in. You're not gonna all of a sudden win a bunch of money. Like, no one's gonna give you anything at all. I just think that it's just hard work and focus and sacrifice and struggle. And then maybe one day you'll get to the point where you are in the hammock playing the guitar, chilling, while somebody else is digging with a shovel, right? And they're like, "You're so lucky. How did you get in the hammock? How can you do that? My life sucks. I'm struggling here." It's because they were laying in the hammock while you were working. You know what I mean? And what goes up must come down, and what goes down must come up, right? I think that's the law of life. If everything was easy all the time, we'd become really, really soft, and we would fall apart in a storm. So, how can we create these buffers, man? Maybe, here's a little step. You could just go open up a bank account called emergency savings, and go put like 5% of everything in it all the time. Or you can open up a bank account called operating expenses or payroll. Or I have a bank account called winter savings, right? I'm always saving money in that bank account, and that way when the winter comes, there's a buffer. The craziest thing happened, my wife and I just moved into a new house recently. Finally got a house, dude. It took forever to finally get a house. And at some point about 1.5 years ago, we got so sick and tired of not having a house. I said, you know what? I'm just going to open up a bank account, and I'm going to call it Saving for a House. And I literally started just socking money in it. I said to my wife, let's just pretend, act like we're going to end up getting a house, because I don't know what else to do. I think I learned it from Bob Proctor or something. And then it was weird. Before I knew it, there's, you know, a couple grand in that account, then there's several thousand, then there's more, then there's 7,000, then 8,000, and we didn't have enough to put down 20% on a house. That's still a pretty big chunk of change for me, but it was weird. Like, the time came, and then we ended up having a down payment, and I was thinking about that, like, oh my God, I should start a bank account for everything. There's this app called YNAB, Y-N-A-B. Kurt Kempton, the founder of Responsibit, showed me this, and I want to get on this. He said you can compartmentalize your money for all these little tiny different things. Like, in 2020, I want to go on a vacation here, and I'm going to put $10 in the account every single week. Like, what if you compartmentalized it and create all these little buffers all over the place? So you had like 50 of them, and before you know it, they all became full, and then now your life became easy financially, right? Yeah, dog. Alright, I gotta get back to work with this. I was climbing a tree in my flip line. I wasn't wearing gloves, just wore the skin right off my hand. Isn't that disgusting? Alright, dog, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you soon. Later.